You fool! Warren is dead. It happened on the Mysterious Isle of Seacliffe by Ian Gordon. On Seacliffe. If, on a clear day, one follows the Cleveland Way between Port Mulgrave and the seaside village of Staithes, a glance across the North Sea might just reveal a distant shape, the suggestion of a bleak, rocky outcrop on the horizon. Though denizens of nearby mainland towns may spurn its mention, certain barefaced fishermen might identify the barren isle as Seacliffe. Some 15 miles long and, at its widest point, 6 miles wide, the Isle of Seacliffe is home to 1,000 people, and was once a centre for the mining of lead ore, the evidence of which remains in the intimidating headstocks of Morton Lead Mine, which tower above the island's coastal capital, Redditch. In 1978, Seacliffe natives welcomed the closure of Morton Lead Mine, eagerly resuming the agricultural pursuits that have enabled the islanders to subsist independently for centuries. The isle rarely receives visitors. The most common callers are haulers, with whom Seacliffe farmers occasionally trade. The scarcity of tourists is due, in part, to age-old rumors pertaining to shadowy practices and alleged cult activity. The British publication Fortean Weekly has presented a number of articles on Seacliffe, some of which nominate the isle as the probable location of the mysterious sect, the Seven Sisters, sometimes known as the Order of the Sleeper. Rumors and speculation aside, access to Seacliffe is difficult due to the cessation of public transport following the closure of the lead mine, though a penny or two tossed in the direction of a lone hauler might just entitle one to a means of passage. Beyond the conveniences Redditch has to offer, general store, pub with lodgings, a monthly farmer's market, to name a few, the isle is dominated by two distinct topographical features. Cap Mountain, the flat summit of which stands at 2,100 feet, and Northcliffe Moor, a vast expanse of heath divided by rough tracks, cultivated dales, and babbling waterways. The barren rock known as Seacliffe is a strange, unexplored, enigmatic jewel. Its reclusive residents, ostensibly, would like to see that it stays that way. Introduction. The following handwritten account, presented here in 12 parts, was penned by the eminent paranormal fiction writer Edgar J. Howarth, following his alleged excursion to the Isle of Seacliffe in the late winter of 1990. 1. An Island in the Darkness. December 22nd, 1990. Finally! Decades of research culminating in a 4-night stay just a few feet from the harbour here in Staithes on the North Yorkshire coast. The cottage is delightful, cosy, colourful, overlooking the sea. Perhaps retirement will permit me to return to this haven. A local fisherman, Cooper is his name, has agreed to take me to Seacliffe, under the proviso I keep the fact to myself. A reputation counts for a lot up here, I've gathered. Well, the man's secret's safe with me. I've no real interest in him or his repute. My interest lies out there, beyond the dark waves that, at this very moment, are lapping at the foundation stones of this old place. What can I say about Seacliffe? It hardly seems necessary to prattle on about its remoteness, its strangeness. You should see the looks on the faces of the villagers here when I so much as hint at it. Rather, I should say this. It's an island of secrets. As Churchill once said of Russia, it is a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma. Should I speak of my dreams? The visions that have haunted me for as long as I can remember? Soon, perhaps. Those in the know, those who have put the hours in, will know about the sect, an order dedicated to the reappearance of some unimaginably ancient being or deity. And, if my calculations are correct, The homecoming of said deity is nigh. Shouldn't I be cautious, afraid? Probably. The truth is, vindication is a powerful motivator. To prove conclusively that the terrible creatures we horror writers plunder the depths of the human soul to uncover actually exist, that they live and breathe as we do, share our sunsets, gaze at the moon, that would be vindication indeed. I'm 57 years old. I've seen my fair share of real-life horror. Perhaps it's the fear of real-life horror that drives writers such as me to explore the fantastic. That, and the dreams, of course. Regardless, my work has steered me here, and soon enough I'll stand upon that barren rock and garner the insight dusty books can only infer. Christmas Eve, 8 p.m. Staithe sure is quiet this time of year. Have barely seen a soul today. I'm exaggerating, of course. The locals are out and about. Slipped into the Royal George this evening in search of food. Enjoyed a 3-course meal whilst listening to the muted conversations taking place at the bar. It would have been nice to overhear mention of the Isle, but, as I've already suggested, the locals seem reluctant to talk about it. The subject of Seacliffe is one to be dismissed by all and sundry in these parts. Perhaps the sect has tendrils here on the mainland, a sort of smoke-screen. Well, that's as maybe, but I'm not one to stoke a fire with my bare hands. Passage to the Isle has been arranged. That's good enough for me. So, what do I know about the key issues? I have to admit that I'm not exactly bursting with insight, but I can at least offer a brief summary of what I've learned. The Isle of Seacliffe, an island for all intents and purposes lost in the North Sea, is the home of the Order of the Sleeper, a small sect dedicated to a weird fish god. It has been suggested that this unnamed god, referred to as the Sleeping King, is a fertility god, much like the Mesopotamian deity Dagon. However, this idea has never held much water with me. The true nature of this thing is unknown. It has also been inferred that the sect welcomes the return of their god in physical form every 50 years, the last reappearance having taken place in the winter of 1940. Evidence of this was proffered by a downed German fighter pilot during the Second World War, who, in open water, just east of the Mysterious Isle, was almost pulled under by something enormous that swam by him in the night. Washed ashore just south of the island's capital, Redditch, he described a crowd of cavorting locals on the seafront, the sand an eerie scarlet under a blood-red sky. The book, The Rare and the Radical, by P.B. Harris, outlines in greater detail all of the above. Over the years, I've found that it's futile to chase rumors. It's impossible to corroborate any wild tale without a thorough investigation. Even then, I doubt the locals, notoriously tight-lipped they are, will open up to the likes of me. I suppose only time will tell. That just leaves the dreams, the visions that are sharpened somewhat when contemplating the strange account of that downed fighter pilot. Christmas Day, 2 p.m. I haven't spent Christmas Day alone in 25 years, though I have to admit the cottage is the perfect place to do so. My hosts have been generous enough to furnish the lounge with a rather modest Christmas tree. Its baubles are exclusively red glass, but its presence is appreciated nonetheless. I've a plump turkey crown in the oven, the leftovers of which will serve me well en route to the Isle tomorrow. I'll dine, toast to Mary, and spend the rest of the day by the window. These last few days I've noticed an intermittent shimmering on the horizon just after sunset. How tantalizing. Boxing Day, 8:30 a.m. I can hardly believe it. I've made it. Seacliffe. And though the heavens have opened, I'm sitting somewhat comfortably in a small shack overlooking the North Sea. But how did I get here, I hear you ask? Armed with my trusty hold-all, I met with Cooper, a grizzled character in a thick wool coat and bucket hat, by the harbour at 6 a.m. sharp. My being punctual was another, albeit unspoken, proviso. In a manner all too casual, we boarded the wooden-hulled vessel Tunny and set off into the blackness of a chilly December morning. Though dark and foreboding, we sailed upon a dead calm sea, my eyes fixed upon the bow in anticipation of some fast-approaching, unseen behemoth. Regarding Cooper, I attempted small talk once or twice, but the fellow was far too preoccupied with his duties at the helm to pay me any notice. That said, he hadn't been much of a talker in the first place. I had my taking him by surprise on the 22nd to thank for securing passage to the Isle. The poor fellow hadn't a chance to decline my request. At approximately 7:30, Cooper mumbled something above the hum of the Tunny, and shortly afterwards I was able to perceive a dark mass starboard. This, of course, was my first glimpse of the mysterious Isle of Seacliffe. As we neared the island, the sun was rising in the east, illuminating the rolling hills and the seemingly colossal crag known as Cap Mountain. An ethereal presence loomed in the light mist that clung to the hills and peaks like cotton wool, a presence that I could have sworn emitted the softest whine or drone, with a vocal quality the likes of which I'd never heard before. And though the drone was faint and wistful, it was possessed of an eeriness that didn't so much frighten as it did entice me. Unusually, we docked some miles north of the main harbour at Redditch. This, Cooper grunted at me, being due to the fact that the old hauler was apparently in no mood to barter with the natives on Boxing Day. His reasoning was razor-thin, I thought, and couldn't help but sense another, deeper cause for reluctance lurking beneath the straw-like beard that filled 2/3 of his windswept face. And so, as the clouds above burst, I jogged the length of the tired pier to which the Tanya had delivered me, and clambered up a slippery stone staircase in the direction of this very shack. According to Cooper, the uneven road, more of a track really, along which the shack stands, will take me all the way to Redditch. I'll wait for the worst of the rain to pass, and then I'll be on my way. But boy, is it exciting! 2. Sirens. Boxing Day, 10 a.m. Yet again I've been forced to seek sanctuary from the inclement weather the isle is subjecting me to. But that's not the only reason. I left the wooden shack a little after 9:15, the rain having let up somewhat. I took off at a brisk pace in a southerly direction, following the twisting, overgrown track. The wool-like fog encircled me completely, veiling my immediate surroundings. I noticed, however, thanks to occasional breaks in the mist, that to the west a tall, almost vertical rock face overlooked the vicinity, a huge, imposing mass of hulking stone. It was from this rock face that I perceived a distant wailing. It was only in the journal entry prior to this one that I described hearing a whine or drone as Cooper and I neared the isle aboard the Tunny, but as I traversed the track, rainfall and my boots upon the gravel the only other sounds, the wailing was clear to hear. To describe it as melodic just won't suffice. Though wistful, mournful even, this wailing is harsh, dissonant, and choral, as though emptied from the lungs of 100 sirens. I describe the wailing in the present tense because right now, pen in hand, barely sheltered by the withered limbs of a solitary hawthorn, I can hear it plainly. There's an urgency in it. A warning, perhaps? Or are these merely the observations of a highly imaginative horror fiction writer? I'm going to stay here a while. Listen and observe. The rain appears to be letting up again. With a bit of luck, this late morning mist will shortly abate, affording me a proper view of the nearby rock face. Boxing Day, 10:30 a.m. Fortune favours the patient, it would seem. The veil of mist is almost entirely lifted, and what lies beneath? Blimey! The track I'm treading is some 20 feet or so above sea level, I'd say. The rock face, located a couple of 100 feet to the east, is truly enormous. I'd have to estimate a height of 300 feet at its highest point, stretching from the very north tip of the island to some as of yet unseen point to the south. There are strange fissures on the rock face, deep, inaccessible crevices from which the strange wailing appears to be emanating. There's a dozen or so of these, round apertures in the stone, all suggestive of dark passages host to hidden things, things with a single purpose, to welcome, or more likely, to ward off would-be sightseers. Did I mention that I'm highly imaginative? I get carried away sometimes. I'm sure those dissonant harmonies are nothing more than the result of the wind blowing against the numerous hollows. Mother Earth has a song for us all, I once heard someone say, whether that song be the roar of the ocean or the clap of the storm. But these strange oscillations are highly unusual, and dare I say, familiar? What if those caverns up there on the cliff do belong to hidden denizens of the isle? Small folk, like the little men of County Bravardus, alive and well, if only ever glimpsed in our peripheral vision, ancient sirens whose song is their frustration, forever ignored by the logical mind of man. I like to keep these thoughts in mind when exploring weird, remote places. Better not to make assumptions when in the presence of the unknown. Is that the sun I can see? It might just turn into a pleasant day after all. I'd better be on my way. Boxing Day, 11:15 a.m. Redditch as I live and breathe. Following a tricky ascent, all the while goaded by those incessant secret sirens, I'm now standing at the crest of a narrow hilltop, from which the entirety of the isle's capital, Redditch, is visible below. I can see the coast, a broad swathe of yellow sand, myriad colourful cottages looking out to sea, their chimneys breathing smoke into the air, a smattering of steeples and towers intersecting uneven terracotta rooftops, and, overlooking all, atop the precipitous hillside to the east, the proud, imposing headstocks of the now defunct Morton lead mine. Redditch, as seen from this vantage point, is highly reminiscent of the resort town of Scarborough, if truth be told, though on a much smaller scale, naturally. Appealing odours are assailing my nostrils. Cooked breakfasts and hot coffee, burning wood and herbal tea. Now's a good time to tuck into the turkey sandwich I've stowed away in my hold-all. In the town's centre, a vast square is clearly visible, in the middle of which stands a sizable Christmas tree. It appears to be entirely unadorned, with the exception of something affixed to the crown. I can't make it out from up here. Various individuals are at work on the square, assembling stalls and kiosks. I think that will be my first port of call. Interestingly, though the odd vehicle, rusty off-roaders and maroon saloons, can be spied here and there, not a single engine can be heard ticking over, nor are there any cars traversing the numerous roads. One gets the impression that the inhabitants of Seacliffe are more inclined to conduct their affairs on foot. The stillness of the place is intoxicating. It truly feels as though I've crossed some hitherto uncharted ocean, sailed into some bygone era, unearthed a land of peace and solitude. The arc of the coast and the surrounding hills that separate the town from the rest of the island only serve to highlight the town's isolation, both here on the Isle and in the United Kingdom as a whole. I can safely say that it pleases me. There's just something about it that feels like home. It's funny. Now that I've arrived, I'm beginning to wonder if the rumors pertaining to Seacliffe are merely that. Rumors, exaggerated tall tales. Is Redditch just another ordinary seaside town? That distant wailing suggests otherwise. Even now, with my eyes fixed upon the sleepy community below, I can hear that ugly, dissonant chorus. And those dreams, those recurring visions that have plagued me for decades, are they not sometimes accompanied by the faint, mournful cries of unseen sirens? 3. Market Day. Boxing Day, 5:30 p.m. What a strange day indeed. Having descended into Redditch from what I later learned was called Watcher's Peak, I made my way to the large central square, upon which I'd observed the assembly of stalls and kiosks from above. Along the way, I exchanged glances with a handful of locals I encountered, and was pleasantly surprised to receive warm, friendly greetings in return. One especially elderly gent went so far as to tip his hat, accompanied by a guttural grunt in a dialect much too broad for me to discern. Accordingly, I returned a genial good morning and continued on my merry way. Reaching the precinct, or market square, I blundered into the midst of things, my eyes drawn to the numerous booths and huts. Evidently, Boxing Day in Redditch was market day, and, judging by the copious amounts of food being prepared left, right, and centre, it was a day in which the locals indulged in culinary excess. I saw sausages and bacon, lamb and mutton, carrots and turnips, sprouts and pickles, vats of mulled wine and bubbling cider, Yule logs and mince pies, flans and brownies. Though for a seaside town on an island in the North Sea, there was a curious lack of seafood on display. None at all, in fact. My senses were overwrought, and, still hungry following the precarious journey along the cliffs and the bite-sized turkey sandwich I devoured atop Watcher's Peak, I immediately withdrew my wallet and ordered myself a plump sausage bap, positively bursting with stuffing, and haphazardly smeared with cranberry sauce. So hungry was I, in fact, that I failed to acknowledge the complete and utter indifference with which the marketeers and milling locals regarded me. Don't get me wrong, the vendors bowed and the shoppers grinned, but I felt as though I was being treated much in the way another local might be, like just another member of the community. Wasn't it plain to see that I was an outsider? Wasn't it clear that I lacked the distinctive ruggedness that each and every face I encountered possessed? I was aware of other settlements on the isle, but I was reasonably sure that the inhabitants of those places would be well acquainted with Redditch and its denizens. Then again, it is difficult to be reasonably sure about anything with regards to Seacliffe. Moving between the stalls, I was impressed by the effort each of the respective marketeers had made in adorning his or her kiosk. The expected seasonal furnishings were present in most cases, wreaths and colourful garlands, boastful trees and bright lights, miniature cottages and street scenes sprinkled with artificial snow. But there were other elements, too, outre elements, wooden carvings depicting malformed crabs and crayfish, clay statues portraying squat creatures with the heads of cephalopods, and vast eight-sided plates. At the center of each was engraved a tentacled, kraken-like creature with the face of what I guessed was a pollock or cullfish. This depiction, whatever it was, seemed incongruous with the quiet townsfolk and the innocuous market. But then I glanced at the Christmas tree, towering above the stalls in the middle of the square. Topping it, which had been indistinguishable from Watcher's Peak, was the head of a fish, the same fish as depicted on the plates. I am all but certain that this creature, this symbol, the eight-tentacled monstrosity with the head of a cullfish, represents the subject of worship here on Seacliffe, the Sleeping King, after which the sect, the Order of the Sleeper, is named. The indifference displayed by the locals had its downside. Though they appeared to be more than happy for me to go about my business, the individuals I attempted to connect with were unwilling to enter into conversation with me. Even the marketeers, after collecting my money and serving up the goods, would retreat into the shadows, where they remained unapproachable. And so I slipped away from the market square and sought the Golden Crab, the only pub in Redditch, or so I'd been informed, that offered accommodation. Owing to the irregularity of visitors to the island, I was afraid that I might be turned away, forced to seek shelter in some abandoned building or shack. But, fortunately, upon locating the pub, I was welcomed into its dark and humid belly, and was provided with a suite without much ado. The landlady, Annie Black was the name she gave, was more than happy to provide me with lodging, on condition that, and it didn't come as a surprise, I keep myself to myself, and keep engagements with the pub regulars to a minimum. Friendly though she was, I felt that the smile she wore was somewhat superficial, that the smile every resident of Redditch I'd encountered wore was also superficial, that my presence was tolerated much in the manner one tolerates that of an ant or fly, until it parks itself in an inconvenient place and has to be dealt with accordingly. And so, keen to keep the peace, and to allow myself the freedom to roam and explore without too much scrutiny, I agreed to Miss Black's terms, and, rather than choosing to cozy up at the bar with the 4 or 5 locals staring into space with absent abandon, I chose to lock myself in my suite on the first floor. The suite is basic, minimal furnishings comprising bed, wardrobe, and writing desk, and a private bathroom accessed via a crooked red door. The desk is by an east-facing window, providing a view of both the market square and the ocean beyond. It's a superb spot to sit and write. I ventured out again at around 2:30 p.m. in order to source provisions for the room. Fortunately, the market was still in full swing on the square, and so I bagged myself several bottles of mineral water, a couple of handfuls of blackberries, a loaf of bread, and 200 grams of honey-glazed ham. Again I was subjected to the same indifferent glances and greetings, forced into the exchange of simple pleasantries with a dozen weather-beaten faces. I was just leaving the square when I noticed some commotion ensuing to the northeast. I made my way towards the din, and attached myself to the rear of what had quickly become a substantial crowd, surrounding a group of ladies atop a small stage. A strange hooting followed, courtesy of the enthusiastic audience. And then the dance began. There were 5 ladies upon the stage, each of them dressed in close-fitting, dark green scale-effect dresses. They wore heavy-looking tap shoes, with which they were hammering out a frantic rhythm. To this rhythm, the audience continued to hoot that bizarre melody. Was it faintly recognizable, that melody, or was there something about its simplicity that made one feel as though they'd heard it many times before? The ladies tapped in unison, their supple bodies invigorated by the crowd's chanting. It was all very odd. Then another lady, a tall, elderly lady, climbed onto the stage, carrying a banner of sorts. The dance increased in tempo, the hooting of the audience raised in pitch, and with this ascending chorus, the banner the lady carried was raised into the air. And once again, there it was, in full color, that ghastly tentacled thing with the coalfish head. I took my leave, keen to avoid the climax. The whole thing had stirred something in me, something I didn't like. It had me itching from head to toe. Unable to detach myself from the spectacle, I watched the rest of the performance from the window here in my suite. The ladies departed the stage at 4. The crowd dispersed shortly afterwards. It's been a long day. I think I'll make a ham sandwich and read a book for a couple of hours. There are a few paperbacks in here. The Brittle Kingdom by N. Kane, The Naturalists by P.R. Wonder, and somewhat appropriately, the Jules Verne classic 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think I'll opt for the latter. 4. The Pier Pirate. December 27th, 5 a.m. I've awoken to a plethora of strange sounds out in the night. I'm sat by the window under the dim glow of a desk lamp, trying, vainly, to make out the myriad shapes moving back and forth across the market square. It's extremely dark out there. The square is cloaked in shadow, and the sea beyond is merely a vast plain of illimitable blackness. But there they are, those lumpy forms, coming and going, muttering to one another. The things don't so much walk as crawl. And if I were to compare their deftness to something, it would be to that of a caste of crabs, furtively sidling to and from destinations unknown. I can't make their mutterings out, if the vocalizations are indeed words, just an incessant, high-pitched, insectile droning, as the nebulous bodies go about their strange, nocturnal duties. What on earth is going on down there? December 27th, 8 a.m. At 7 a.m. sharp, I received a wake-up call in the form of a light tapping at my door. Donning my slippers, I opened the door and was pleasantly surprised to find a freshly cooked breakfast waiting for me, comprising sausages, eggs, several rounds of toast, and a steaming cafetiere. The food was wonderful. Can't say I'm a huge fan of the coffee, though. It held an aniseed flavor that didn't sit too well with me. Either way, I'll be sure to thank Miss Black on my way out later. December 27th, 12:15 p.m. And so it continues. The strangeness, I mean. Shortly after 8:30, having dressed following a tepid shower, I made my way out into Redditch. I thanked Miss Black for the courtesy of breakfast, but refrained from commenting on the commotion I witnessed in the early hours. A proviso of keeping myself to myself was still at the forefront of my mind, and I had no desire to rock the boat with her. Crossing the market square in direction of the coast, whatever it was that had been shuffling across it in the night had left no evidence, I observed. The stalls and kiosks that had been filled with such a wonderful variety of foodstuffs the day before were still present, though now they were empty, their skeletal frames akin to macabre metal statues. I must add that the weather was fine at this point. Blue skies predominated. The air held a slight, refreshing chill, for which I was grateful. The town was utterly devoid of activity. I observed a number of shops along the precinct, butcher, greengrocer, the little wool shop, all of which appeared to be open, though shoppers were nowhere to be seen. Reaching the promenade, which runs parallel north to south along Foreshore Road, I spent a few minutes admiring the long stretch of coast. Several artifacts strewn across the broad beach caught my eye. A shipwreck, or should I say boat wreck, due to its small size, a vast pile of whale bones, and, most notably, a huge rock jutting out of the water to the south, a titanic monolith, highly reminiscent of Baalbek's Stone of the Pregnant Woman, in both its overall appearance and the way in which it sloped vertically upwards from out of the sea. Gazing at that rock, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it, much like one who has travelled for many years yearns for a taste of home. Had I seen it in my dreams? Stood upon it in my wildest nightmares? Catching sight of a group of youngsters to the north, I made a mental note to return to the rock, and set off towards them. The north end of the promenade is host to the old harbour, which, I've gathered from my research, once served Morton Lead Mine. It comprises two inaccessible piers, the flat and empty East Pier, serving as the main breakwater, and Sandside Pier, host to a number of derelict buildings, including the remains of a lighthouse. The youngsters I'd spotted, 3 boys approximately 12 years of age, were standing by the chained-up entrance to Sandside Pier, their eyes glued to the back of what at one time, ostensibly, was a nautical museum or similar. This I deduced from the presence of multiple props and discarded display pieces to the rear of the building. I approached the boys and, innocently enough, asked them what they were looking at. It was immediately obvious that the youngsters weren't quite as disconnected as their elders. They acknowledged my presence enthusiastically, whilst commenting amongst themselves in hushed tones on my evident exoticism. And then, in short order, the boys quickly turned my attention to one of the discarded props on the other side of the steel bars. The prop in question was an upright, life-size statue of a pirate, adorned in the expected attire, frock coat, tricorn, and cavalier boots, complete with a plastic cutlass. Its back was facing us, and it, in turn, was facing a large dark window, almost as though the still figure was peering inside. "Why, exactly, are you spying on a plastic pirate?" I asked, to which the evident leader of the trio, the red-headed character whose buddies called him Moffat, informed me that the pirate was alive. Frowning, I took a seat by the heavy-looking gates and listened to the tale as the boys claimed to have experienced it. Apparently, it had all started 7 days earlier, when Moffat had been walking his dog, Hannibal, along the promenade, and happened to notice that old Blackbeard hadn't been in his usual position by the window. In fact, Blackbeard was nowhere to be seen. Puzzled by this turn of events, Moffat had reported the fact to Howie and Hodds, his two closest chums, and the three of them had returned to the pier late that same afternoon to investigate. Unfortunately for Moffat, Blackbeard had returned, and was observed by Howie and Hodds to be in precisely the same location he usually was. Moffat, dismissing the turn of events as a trick of the light, returned the following morning, dog in tow, to discover that the plastic pirate had moved again, though this time he hadn't disappeared. Blackbeard was present all right, only now his back was to the window, and his dead eyes were gazing absently in the direction of the chained-up gates. Spooked, Moffat once more sought the company of his two closest pals, and returned to Sandside Pier. Howie and Hodds were shocked to discover that their buddy hadn't been joking after all. Blackbeard had indeed moved, and even more shocked was Moffat, who now saw that the plastic pirate had crept forward further still. The figure's frame was now within spitting distance of the heavy gates, and its malleable arms were raised, as though in the act of reaching out to touch them. Rather than flee, as might have been the case should such a strange set of circumstances arisen on the mainland, these three boys, hardy and brazen, approached the rusty gates, and eyed the character on the other side with much deliberation. But there was no movement in the old statue. Blackbeard was frozen in place, just as he had always been, his lifeless eyes fixed on nothing in particular, glazed plastic orbs, unseeing, unaware. And there the figure remained for several days, static and mute, overlooked by other members of the community, all of whom simply passed Sandside Pier without so much as a glance in the direction of the recently animated plastic pirate. Then it was Christmas Day, and the boys, obsessed with the strangeness occurring on the pier, had agreed to meet by the old gates at noon. The rain had been beating down, they said, when, with a great deal of hesitation, the three lads approached the derelict pier, and saw, much to their horror, old Blackbeard behind the rusty bars, his peeling plastic hands clutching the chained-up handles, a look of fiery frustration painted across his sun-bleached face. It was then Moffat insisted that old Blackbeard was finally observed to move before their very eyes, to pull frantically at the metal bars, to snarl fiercely in a futile attempt to break free of his pier prison, to fill the hearts of the three youngsters with pure terror. They took off, never looking back. Yesterday, Boxing Day, coinciding with my arrival, the boys took the decision to avoid the pier, fearful of the consequences of the pirates' escape. But, as their present return to the harbour confirmed, the plastic pirate had failed in his attempts to escape, and, evidently, had returned to the position he had apparently occupied for over a decade. I'm not sure what to make of the boy's story. I know the look of sincerity when I see it, and those boys wore it unwaveringly. But can I really believe that inanimate objects have the potential to come to life here, like dolls locked up in toy stores after closing time? Surely not. It's a bit of fun, that's all it is. A bit of fun at the expense of the newcomer. But as I sit here in my suite contemplating the tall tale, I have to wonder, what if the story of the plastic pirate is merely the tip of a much larger and much uglier iceberg. 5. The Seven Sisters. December 27th, 2:30 p.m. Some moments ago, I was enjoying a cup of tea by the window, observing the occasional comings and goings of locals on the square below, when I heard a rustling by the door. Turning, I saw that a wrinkled brown envelope had been slipped under it. Collecting said item, I opened it, and discovered that it was an invitation. It reads as follows: Dear Mr. Howarth, welcome to the island. We would like to invite you to our humble sanctuary. A discussion is in order. From the market square, climb Wendell Passage in the direction of South Terrace, and look for us at Redditch Tower. It's the old church that overlooks the sea. Yours loyally, the Seven Sisters. The Seven Sisters, indeed. The pieces are falling into place. I'm eager to meet with them, and to listen to what they have to say, but it's fair to add that I'm a little nervous, too. Why on earth are they reaching out to me? Well, it looks like I've a little walk ahead of me. December 27th, 7:15 p.m. Where do I begin? After receiving the sisters' invitation, I finished my cup of tea and set out for Redditch Tower. The skies were still perfectly clear, resulting in a plunge in temperature. Fortunately, I was well prepared for the cold, having donned my wool scarf and gloves. I located Wendell Passage, a tight ginnel situated in the southeast corner of the square, and followed its narrow, meandering confines towards a steep stone staircase. I must have climbed some 200 steps or more before reaching South Terrace, an open thoroughfare overlooking the terracotta rooftops of the town below. The chill was biting up there, enhanced by a southerly gale. I was afforded a wonderful, clear view of Cap Mountain, towering above the heaths to the southwest. The barren plains between my vantage point and the mountain were breathtaking. That they could be traversed in an hour or a week was a dizzyingly disorientating notion as I gazed across its bleakness. I was taken aback by the scarcity of life. Few birds, few trees, with only the occasional impressions of cultivated land and wandering livestock. I followed the exposed thoroughfare a little further to the east in the direction of Redditch Tower. The structure was impossible to miss, though not as striking or imposing as the ever-looming headstocks of Morton Lead Mine to the west. The old church made quite an impression, with its bold granite facade and its broad steeple somewhat masked by the withered limbs of numerous tall trees. And quite the commanding view of the ocean it had, too, a panoramic sweep of the North Sea such as I've never witnessed. Approaching the old tower, it was curious to gaze upon the stretch of coastline below, from which that strange, vast rock protruded from the lapping waves. What could its original purpose have been? Stepping into a sizable courtyard along its northeast face, I approached the vast double doors that marked the entrance to Redditch Tower. It wasn't necessary to knock. A cloaked figure opened the door the moment I neared it, beckoning me into the uncertain gloom beyond. Crossing the threshold, I issued a nod of the head, sensing that the unusually tall, veiled character wasn't particularly vocal. I was shown, by way of a plain chamber and several interconnected corridors, to a vast hall, at the center of which stood a large dining table, peopled by 5 similarly shrouded, mysterious figures. At the head of the table, in a dark grey gown, sat an elderly lady, her face a testament to the endurance of the hardy. Invited to sit with a wave of her hand, I did so, positioning myself opposite the lady in grey. For several moments I studied my surroundings, absorbing the drab and utterly unadorned space in which I had found myself. Beams of light penetrated the hall at intervals, highlighting a number of items on the table before me, namely, a dozen silver goblets, 6 of those 8-sided plates I'd seen at the market the day prior, and a large leather-bound book open to its middle pages. On the verso, under the glow of an errant shaft of light, I beheld yet another interpretation of that kraken-like thing, that tentacled monster with the face of a coalfish. The lady in grey must have noticed my disgust, as her first words were with regards to the thing. "He's coming home," she said, gesturing towards the detailed sketch before me. "Who is?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "The sleeping king," she answered. "Oh," I said, averting my gaze from the troublesome illustration. Just why this lady, this representative of the Seven Sisters, had chosen to share these sentiments with me, I hadn't the slightest clue. But as I looked at her, dimly illuminated in the drab hall, I felt some modicum of recognition. Had I met her before? If so, when and where? Silence prevailed for the longest time. I felt my limbs threatening to atrophy. But then the lady in grey climbed to her feet, rising high above the table. Like her counterpart, the silent lookout who had shown me in, this old woman was extraordinarily tall, her long years showing on her face alone. At a guess, I'd say she was in her late 80s, but her stature told another story. I watched, somewhat mesmerized, as the tall figure marched slowly back and forth, in and out of the rays of light, her steps rhythmical and graceful. Hadn't she been at the dance last night? Wasn't this the lady that had climbed onto the stage with the hideous banner? I was all but certain. "He's coming home," she said again, casting glances at the open pages of the book on the table. My eyes were drawn to the other individuals at the table. All 5 of them were female, each of them still and silent in the presence of the lady in grey. They were undoubtedly the 5 lithe dancers who had preceded the lady in grey yesterday. "Do you know why you are here?" the lady in grey asked. A strange question, I thought, as I knew exactly why I was there, on the island at least. "I'm a writer," I answered boldly. "I'm here in search of inspiration for a new writing project." To this, the lady in grey failed to respond. She simply continued her quiet pacing back and forth, her bare feet quiet upon the cold stones. "Do you recognize it?" she asked, indicating with a long white index finger the open book on the table. And I found that I did. The olive pages, the bold jet-black cursive, the distinctive illustration. "It is," she confirmed, in reply to my unspoken surmise. "The Sorcerella? Really?" I mumbled, dumbfounded. The lady in grey nodded before returning to her seat. Jericho's Sorcerella, the Book of Spells, is an incredibly rare tome indeed. Upon its pages are allegedly the secrets of ancient kings, incantations used to summon beings and entities that walked the infant face of earth long before the advent of mankind. These things, semi-aquatic in nature, evolved on distant worlds billions of years ago. Admittedly, my knowledge of the book is minimal, but one is unable to stray too far into the occult and the paranormal without stumbling across mention of books such as the Sorcerella or Fisk's Nun, for example. "The Sleeping King is not of this earth," came the hoary tones of the lady in grey. "He is a native of the distant world Torla. You may know it by another name, Europa, one of Jupiter's many children. Pure the Sleeping King was, for many eons." I listened, mouth agape. But his purity, like that of his brethren, was lost when, and she paused hesitantly here, they arrived. Who or what the lady implied by they, I never learned, as she neglected to elaborate, and I was too dumbstruck to ask. If the grotesque creature portrayed on the plates and the pages of the Sorcerella was once the victim of something more terrible and monstrous, I'm not sure I want to know. She did, however, in cryptic fashion, turn to another page of the legendary tome, which, to my great surprise, included a map of the island complete with topographical markers, and said, "This is his home now, the Isle of Seacliffe, and the deep waters that surround it." The lady paused again. "He's coming home," she stated for the third time, and then added, looking right at me, "As are you." And it was with those loaded words that I felt that queer jolt of recognition once again. Who was this lady, really? In the same moment, a strange burning sensation spread across the flesh behind my ears, and I began to scratch fiercely like some flea-ravaged dog. I was about to ask a question. Well, several questions, actually. Why do the 7 sisters number only 6? What does the return of the sleeping king have to do with me? What in the world is going to happen when he does return? But the lady in grey put a stop to all that. She raised a pale hand above her head and whispered, "Be on your way, Mr. Howarth." And so I left Redditch Tower with more questions than answers. Isn't that always the case? Returning to the Golden Crab, I contemplated the sisters' possession of Jericho's Sorcerella, the suggested origin of the sleeping king, Europa, in the shadow of Jupiter, and the recondite they that drove the deity from his ancestral home. These were things I hadn't known, couldn't have known. Was the Sorcerella an extraterrestrial text? I simply must look into the history of Jericho when I return to the mainland. Furthermore, I considered the suggestion that I too was experiencing a homecoming. In what possible manner? I mean, I can't deny the pull this place has always had on me. Can't refute the familiarity I feel when I look upon certain faces. Can't ignore the strange, indifferent way in which the natives regard me. And the dreams. What about the dreams? I must take the evening to think and unwind. What revelations might tomorrow bring? 6. The Critters. December 28th, 8:15 a.m. Following a restful, contemplative evening and an exceptionally good night's sleep, almost entirely free of disturbances outside, I was thrilled again to be the recipient of another cooked breakfast courtesy of Miss Black. Blackened sausages, poached eggs, toasted wholemeal, and fat, succulent tomatoes. But still, the coffee on the side wasn't to my liking. That licorice aftertaste completely ruined it. Now, I said that my night's rest had been almost free of disturbances. The truth of the matter is that I arose at something past 4 to visit the little boy's room, and, upon my return to bed, I happened to hear once more that relentless, shrill, insectile droning out on the square. Briefly, I pulled the curtains aside and gazed out across the dark precinct. And there they were again, just barely visible, those crab-like, unwieldy forms gliding back and forth. I simply must query the matter with Miss Black. December 28th, 9 a.m. Having praised the landlady rather verbosely for the cooking of a sizable breakfast, I proceeded to ask her about the strange things I'd heard and all but seen in the early hours. Somewhat reluctantly, Miss Black agreed to speak on the subject. She says that the creatures in question are what she and other Seacliffe natives refer to as the Critters, inhabitants of the now abandoned lead mine, beings that, for some reason or other, and only in the wee hours, leave the comfort of the mines in order to feast upon plankton and seaweed at high tide. Miss Black neglected to add much else, but volunteered the name of a retired miner, Mr. James Johnston, who, she assures me, won't need much encouragement to talk about the critters. And so it's with that assurance in mind that I'm off to pay Johnston a visit, for I'm convinced somehow that the role these creatures play in devouring plankton and algae is connected to the return of the sleeping king. December 28th, 1:30 p.m. Johnston, what a character! Armed with the vague directions Miss Black supplied me with, I took off in search of Johnston's cottage on Clarence Place. Exiting the market square to the north, I traversed a number of tight lanes and terraced avenues and continued to the northwest, frequently stopping to admire the colourful frontages and well-manicured yards. Arriving at the junction of Grape Lane and Silver Street, I felt that strange sensation of familiarity come over me again. Though Silver Street beckoned, I was relieved to espy a signpost indicating that Clarence Place would be found at the end of Grape Lane. I say relieved, because the weird street that called to me was a grey and deserted thoroughfare, a terraced cul-de-sac composed entirely of bleak, dilapidated townhouses, their dark doors and windows arranged in such a fashion as to suggest grim, forlorn faces. Whatever it was that implied some sort of intimacy with the place, I sensed that it had its origins in the distant past. Somewhat zealously, I traversed Grape Lane, a brighter, more welcoming street, and made my way onto Clarence Place. Johnston's cottage, notable as the only pink-fronted cottage on the road, was impossible to miss. Without hesitation, I rapped upon the door. My knocking seemed to alert the neighbours before it did the occupant of number 13 himself. Curious faces appeared in the windows of the adjacent properties. Faces, it appeared to me, that hadn't seen the sun in many years. Following my second bout of knocking, the distinctive shuffle of a human being sounded on the other side of the pink portal, and, in quick succession, the door was unlocked and yanked open. Johnston was an elderly character indeed. His colourless face was deeply wrinkled and leathery, upon the rosy alcoholic nose of which sat a pair of massive pebble glasses, reducing his tired grey eyes to mere pinpoints. The man scowled as he assessed me, and then, rather unexpectedly, and quite enthusiastically at that, invited me inside. I followed Johnston into a disordered lounge, a hoarder's living room if ever I'd seen one. The space was a shrine to all things trash, from soiled books and magazines to boxed electrical appliances and stacks of folded clothes. Amongst the clutter, I spotted a small table and chairs, to which the old fellow guided me. Sitting, I cut to the chase. "Annie Black tells me you know a thing or two about Morton Lead Mine. Is that right?" "A thing or two?" the old man repeated, his wiry eyebrows ascending as he did so. "I knows everything there is to know about Morton Lead Mine." His voice was hoarse and his throat was thick with phlegm. I prayed to the sleeping king that he wouldn't cough any of it up in my company. "Can you tell me about the critters?" I asked. 2 on 1, he blurted, or something to that effect. Either he was speaking in tongues, or he was mumbling in a foreign language, for he continued to mutter unintelligibly for several moments. "Excuse me?" I uttered, perplexed. "Drove us out of the mines, those things," Johnston continued clumsily. "They were there all along, living, watching, plotting. Had to come to the surface, those things. Had to clear the way. Takes time to clear the way, friend." 2 on 1. "Clear the way?" I asked. "Clear the way for him, friend. Him who must return. You knows, don't you?" It was obvious the man was referring to the sleeping king. "It's the weed," he continued. "The congeries. He can't stand it. You've got to understand, friend. This place isn't like other places. Engineered that way. Every 50 years he comes home. Didn't feed too well in 40. The mine, you see, blocked the critters. The weed was too much for him. Can't stand the stuff, he can't." I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it was plain to see that the old miner was losing his thread. He was becoming agitated, repetitive. From what I could gather, Johnston was suggesting that the sleeping king was unable to tolerate coastal plankton and seaweed. In the winter of 1940, owing to the active mining of lead, the critters were trapped underground, unable to clear the way for the return of their master. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? "Seen 'em this year, have you, friend?" the old man asked. "I think so," I said. Much to my disgust, Johnston laughed, and with the din spewed forth a smattering of black mucus. "Ah, feed well he will this year. 2 on 1. And the elderly miner cackled again, which acted as my cue to leave. I thanked Johnston for his time, and, declining to shake the flaking hand he proffered, I showed myself out and sauntered into the dampness of noon. I looked to the west, and there, high above the rooftops, towered the striking headstocks of Morton Lead Mine. Having some indication as to what it was that resided below those structures, I couldn't help but regard the steel monstrosities as macabre beacons, landmarks serving to remind the islanders of that which lives and breathes beneath its soil. Continuing, Silver Street, the grey dilapidated cul-de-sac, caught my eye again as I came to the end of Grape Lane. What was it about that ghastly place that tempted me so? I shuddered and shuffled on. Presently, I am sitting by the window of my suite, looking out towards the open sea. Most of the dark clouds have passed. I think we might be in for clear skies tonight. As for the old miner and his words of wisdom regarding the critters, I can only speculate as to how all these seemingly disconnected elements of strangeness come together in the presence of an ancient deity. It makes one wonder about the history of the isle in geological terms, about the history of the entire planet in geological terms. What might have dwelt here in the distant past? Strange, alien creatures seeking refuge following world-ending cataclysms? More worryingly, what might have survived here all this time, and what else might have evolved alongside such things to sustain those long survivals? I've much to consider. I think it's time for a sandwich. 7. A blood moon rises. December 28th, 10 p.m. The strangeness intensifies here on Seacliffe. The advent of clear skies this evening revealed the moon above the ocean. Having drifted off for a few hours around 4 p.m., I first observed the waxing gibbous sphere a little after 7. Curiously, though, it's ruddy, just as one expects it to be when observing a lunar eclipse. A sizable crowd had gathered on the market square, the red moon the subject of their attention. Pulling myself together, I donned the requisite winter wear and joined the locals outside. I recognized a few faces: Miss Black, the 3 boys, Moffat, Howie, and Hodds, and the old miner James Johnston, who looked weirdly reinvigorated there on the precinct. The 7 sisters were present too. The stage they danced upon on the 26th had been moved to the east end of the square, overlooking the sea. Upon it, the 6 ladies stood in a line, their gazes fixed on the blood moon. The eyes of all were focused on the crimson satellite, its arrival of obvious significance. Some minutes after my appearance, the head of the 7 sisters, the lady in grey, turned to address the throng of some 100 strong. The first thing she uttered, though unintelligible to my ears, was undoubtedly the same phrase barked at me by the old miner Johnston. 2 on 1, she cried. Her captivated audience, the citizens of Redditch, counted in unison, 2 on 1, and, employing equally illegible phrases, the lady in grey continued her strange sermon. It'd be futile to attempt to phoneticize the bits and pieces I can recall, but after each lengthy outpouring, the lady would cry that same unforgettable phrase, 2 on 1, and the attentive listeners would respond in kind. The glowing orb climbed higher and higher in pursuit of the meridian, tainting the waters below it a deep red. The scene was ghastly. An eerie address conducted under a foreign moon, all and sundry coloured an ill shade of scarlet, the shrill tones of the lady in grey penetrating each and every quarter of the crowded square. And then, quite unexpectedly, the lady in grey's gaze caught mine, and she directed a bony finger at me. Coherent, familiar words followed. "The stranger in our midst, Mr. Howarth, wants to believe," she began. "He's afraid to recall, but he will. 2-on-1, he will." She paused for a moment. "Observe his smooth skin," the lady continued, "his flaxen hair, his bright blue eyes. 100 faces turned to study me, 100 hardy, weather-beaten mugs eyeballing me with the kindliest intensity. I smiled nervously, the sensation of burning behind my ears assailing me again. "Doesn't look like an islander, does he?" came the speaker, her shrill tones piercing every ear. "But it matters not, for he wants to believe. 2-on-1, he wants to believe." I held the lady's gaze, afraid to look away. She was right, of course. I wanted to believe in the existence of the sleeping king, to believe in the cliffside sirens that had called to me on Boxing Day, to believe in the creeping critters, and even the unlikely Pier pirate, as described by young Moffat. But how could I? We fiction writers love to dwell on the odd and the unexplained, but rarely are we afforded the evidence required to nurture belief. I mean, it's fun to entertain the idea of ghosts and ghouls, but what proof do they offer us other than the brief materializations at the ends of dark, interminable corridors? Hard data is severely lacking in this respect. Instead, we're offered ambiguity, with which unexplainable phenomena is left open to interpretation. Just what was that I saw out of the corner of my eye? How on earth is that desk able to float in mid-air in the middle of an empty room? And that mournful voice that whispers to me in the dead of night, to whom does it belong? But that voice I speak of, the one I hear sometimes in my dreams, those queer, hazy dreams, once said that belief in a thing doesn't require evidence. Pushing rationality aside, I called upon those dark, dimly remembered dreams for guidance, visions of the seafront, that titanic rock, faces surrounding me. Had I dreamt of the moon, too? A blood moon? Somewhat mechanically, I looked towards the blood moon and bowed deeply. Why I did so, I haven't the foggiest, but it was almost as though something instructed me, something that dwelled deep in my subconscious. Acknowledging my salute, the lady in grey cried, 2-on-1. Zealously, the audience sang it back to her. Turning to the crimson moon once again, she bowed, much in the manner I had, and, followed by her faithful companions, climbed down from the stage and marched across the square in the direction of Wendell Passage. The crowd gradually dispersed, leaving just 2 individuals on the square, myself and a cordial-looking, middle-aged lady. The stranger, another typical islander, I thought, approached me. "Hello, Edgar," she said, and I was immediately drawn in by the familiarity of her voice. Featherlight it was, as delicate as the night zephyr. "Hello," I began, clutching for a name. "Catherine," she provided. "Oh, hello, Catherine," I said, and I realized that I was nervous in her presence, befuddled and disarmed by both the softness of her voice and the geniality of her countenance. "You have to go back," she continued. "Back?" I asked, puzzled. "To Silver Street," she clarified. Silver Street, that grey and deserted cul-de-sac I'd managed to avoid on my way to James Johnston's place. "I felt drawn to that place for sure," I said. "Why is that?" But Catherine, the stranger with the gentle voice and the friendly face, simply shook her head, adding, "That's precisely why you have to go back." And with those words, my new friend strolled away into the darkness. I watched the blood moon for a few moments longer, and then, feeling tendrils of cold creeping up my spine, I returned to the pub post-haste. And here I've been ever since, musing over the nature of the blood moon and the strange sermon, but more so over my encounter with the mysterious Catherine, the familiar lady with the magical voice. My obsession with Seacliffe is threatening to reveal things I'm not sure I want to know. Have I been here before? Or are these moments of hazy recollection merely figments of my overactive imagination? I fear that I'll know the answer to those questions tomorrow, after I've faced whatever awaits me on that drab cul-de-sac known as Silver Street. 8. The House on Silver Street. December 29th, 8:30 a.m. I slept soundly last night, undisturbed by the critters or by anything else that might have gone bump in the night. Awakening to the gentle knocking of Miss Black, I answered the door and was once again thrilled to discover a cooked breakfast on a serving cart. The meal, consisting of the same ingredients, was delicious, and the coffee, though still unusual with hints of aniseed, was much more palatable. Perhaps I'm becoming accustomed to it. I have to mention this ears business again, though. The skin directly to the rear of my ears is incredibly tender. I wonder if there's something in the fabric softener used here at the pub that's irritating my skin. That aside, I'm about ready to return to Silver Street. I'm fairly reluctant to do so, but it's a necessary evil. Far too many questions. I need answers. It's bitterly cold outside. The frost on the square this morning is testament to the fact. I'll have to wrap up warm. More later. December 29th, 2:15 p.m. Where do I begin? Some things are easy to document. The facts concerning my arrival, the back and forth throughout Redditch, my rendezvous with the Seven Sisters, but the details pertaining to my Silver Street visit this morning aren't quite so straightforward. As expected, the chill was biting when I left the pub. It had me moving at a brisk pace. Into the northern lanes I headed, trying to retrace my steps of the day before. It wasn't too challenging. The attractive facade of the Red House on Cook's Row and the impressive crooked spire of an ancient tower on Queen Street were enough to assist me in my recollection of the route. Again, I was taken by the serenity of the streets. Although the properties in the district were well kept and clearly inhabited, there wasn't a soul in sight. Where was everybody? What were they up to? Were they strolling the beach with pets in tow, fostering the broad heaths, or were they conducting secret rituals in shadowy lofts and basements? It was difficult to dismiss any possibility, given what I'd witnessed on the Isle of Seacliffe thus far. Soon enough, though, I reached the dreaded junction and gazed upon Silver Street, appraising the faded frontages and sinister portals. Not one to hesitate, in most cases anyway, I stepped onto the grey lane, overwhelmed by the raging sense of familiarity that was coursing through my veins. I had walked that street before. The fact was undeniable. But when, and under what circumstances? It was clear that the street was uninhabited. Not a single dwelling appeared to house anything other than pigeons and vermin. Nearing the end of the cul-de-sac, my eyes fell upon one of several four-story townhouses, number 33, one of only a few whose door remained intact. I was taken by the flaking blue paint, the distinctive sash windows, and the glorious, if mossy, portico surrounding the dull cobalt door. How did I know this place? I was reasonably sure I hadn't dreamt of it. The question buzzed around inside my head, looking for a place to land. I had little choice but to enter the house. Climbing the grubby steps, accessed directly from the overgrown path, I approached the knackered door and tried the rusty knob. Unsurprisingly, it was unlocked. Nervously, but still without hesitation, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell of damp was tremendous. I was quick to pull my scarf up around my face. The last thing I needed was a lungful of spores. The interior, grand as it was almost entirely free of furnishings. Several items remained in the lounge: a rotten sofa, a Welsh dresser, and what might have once passed for a television, now just an empty wooden box full of bulbous mushrooms. I passed into the rear of the property, determined to scratch the familiar itch. And then I saw it. On the mantelpiece, in what was probably once the dining room, I spotted a photograph in a heavily stained frame. I collected the picture and brushed away the decades of dust and grime. I was taken aback by what I saw there. There were 4 individuals staring back at me, photographed outside that very house, number 33, Silver Street. The 2 adults I recognized instantly. They were my parents, James and Lou Howarth. The boys with them, some 7 or 8 years old, both resembled me. Had I a twin? I'd never seen a photograph of myself quite so young, nor had I ever seen my parents quite so young, to tell the truth. I knew my parents had relocated from North Yorkshire to Berkshire when I was just a lad, but I'd never been able to recall much about it. My childhood memories consist almost exclusively of long summers in the Downs and cold winters in Bucklebury. That I might have originated here, on the Isle of Seacliffe, is a shocking revelation to me. Is that why the elders of Redditch seemed to recognize me? Did they know that I would eventually return? That my return was somehow heralded by the imminent reappearance of the sleeping king? I know, from discussions with my father in his later years, that we arrived in Berkshire in the spring of 1941. If that's true, then my parents and I were living on the Isle 50 years ago, when the sleeping king was rumored to have last emerged. The winter he fed poorly, according to old Mr. Johnston. Was that one of the reasons we left? But what of the other boy in the photograph? The boy who looks just like me. I never had a brother. It was only the 3 of us, myself, my mother, and my father. No extended family whatsoever. Dumbfounded, I made my slow, contemplative way back to the pub, and here I am, back in my suite, the 50-year-old picture in front of me. The photograph is faded and improperly focused, but there are undoubtedly 2 boys standing there with my parents. What does it mean? I feel as though the obvious thing to do at this juncture is to ask around, perhaps beginning with the mysterious Catherine, if I can locate her. And I'm sure Mr. Johnson would be up for another natter. It's all so bizarre. The whole thing has me on edge. But I have to know. If there's anybody on this island who remembers my parents, then it's in my interest to seek them out. I think I'm going to close my eyes for 20 minutes. I have a lot to process here. 9. Crimson Waters. December 29th, 9 p.m. I woke from my afternoon slumber a little after 4:15 p.m. The last vestiges of sunlight danced on the horizon as I gawped out of the window at the sea. How still it was! A vast, motionless pool. What mysteries did it hold in its calm belly? I dressed, forced a hefty sandwich down my gullet, then wrapped up again before setting out across the market square. I took my time crossing the precinct. Since uncovering my startling heritage this morning, I've been seeing things in a different light. Now, when I look upon the landmarks that surround me, I recognize them all. The town hall, its red brick frontage host to an elaborate bone-white clock face. The towers of the old merchant's hall, since repurposed as a storage facility. The rows of colorful cottages and townhouses. Even the winking, vivid lights of Christmas decorations, illuminating the square. I've looked upon these things before, through the eyes of another Edgar Howarth, a boy lost in time. Reaching the promenade, I neared the dark waters, the strangely luminous foam spewing onto the walkway. The moon was on the rise, fuller now, and a deeper red. The ominous orb spilled its color into the ocean. It looked like a sea of blood. But I felt something else, too. No, scratch that. I remembered something else. Something I'd seen glimpses of in my darkest dreams. I recalled the moon and the sea, this moon and sea, the crimson satellite and the ocean of blood. I recalled the faces of others surrounding me, my parents included, a veritable crowd of people standing here on the promenade, gazing out upon the very same alien vista. The crowd was restless. Voices echoed around me. And then, out at sea, the surface of the water began to rise, as if something beneath was emerging from the deeps, something old, something ancient. And just like that, I was snapped out of my reverie by a passer-by. "Not long now," came the voice of a young man. I turned and found myself looking into the eyes of two individuals, a tall 30-something wearing thick glasses, and an older white-haired gentleman propped up by a walking stick. "Until what?" I replied, feigning ignorance once again. "Oh, I think you know," said the older man, the utterance exposing a cavernous mouth devoid of teeth. We talked for some time regarding the color of the moon and the calm of the ocean, the two strangers carefully avoiding the specifics of just what those strange attributes implied. The younger of the two addressed the senior as Paul, whereas Paul simply referred to his companion as Boy. What their relationship was, I hadn't a clue, but they both appeared to be comfortable enough in my company. Then Paul, whose surname wasn't proffered, shocked me by announcing that he remembered me, that he remembered my parents, too. "Shame what happened," he muttered cryptically, gesturing in the direction of the deep red waters. "And what was that?" I pressed. "You don't remember, Boy?" It was clear that the elderly gent termed anybody his junior boy. "No," I returned simply. Drooling a little, the old man said, "That's most unfortunate." His acquaintance handed him a handkerchief, then insisted it was about time they headed home. This was enough to indicate that the senior was more than likely the young man's father. "Wait," I said, "aren't you going to tell me what happened?" In response to this, old Paul merely shook his head morosely, and, supported by both his companion and his walking stick, shuffled off into the night. I dread to think what it was the senior wasn't saying, but the encounter was none the less fortuitous, in that it enabled me to confirm that I had once lived on the island, thanks to the old-timer's exceptional memory. Thereafter, I headed north towards the old harbor, feeling an odd compulsion to check on Blackbeard. Much to my relief, the plastic pirate was standing precisely where I'd left him 2 days earlier. But his right arm hadn't been raised in the air like that, had it? I had to look over my notes to verify. Typically, I hadn't noted the precise details of his posture. I mean, why would I? Perhaps Blackbeard was alive after all. Simply being here on Seacliffe is enough to stir one's imagination. Were translucent shapes swirling about the remains of the battered lighthouse at the end of Sandside Pier? Were dark shadows patrolling the barren decks of the numerous dilapidated dories? Was that a voice that called to me from the farthest reaches of East Pier, or just the somber cry of a gull? The strange atmosphere of Redditch, coupled with the elusiveness of its peculiar grey-faced denizens, is enough to drive a person mad. Somewhat exasperated, and more than a little spooked, I decided to return to the pub. Miss Black arranged for a meal to be delivered to my room a little after 7 p.m., and here I am, poring over my notes, intermittently eyeballing the faded photograph found at number 33 Silver Street. At this very moment, the blood moon is casting red light upon these pages. I can't ignore it. nor can I ignore the incessant burning sensation behind my ears. What on earth is happening to me? December 29th, 10:45 p.m. Among the paperbacks and bundled newspapers found in the drawer of the writing desk, I've uncovered a single sheet of lined paper, covered with the scribbling of a previous guest. Once again, I'm gazing at a representation of that ubiquitous eight-tentacled monster. The sketch, in pencil, depicts the terrible thing emerging from the sea, its huge dead eyes affixed to a clumsy, squat head. Accompanying the hideous drawing is a short verse written in what appears to be two languages. I'll copy it below. Sanas to fry from the watery sky, for so be reckon to the aerial grave. One so to mun, the mortals they gather, pin to be reckon, birds of a feather. Sanas to rai, the heart of the king, hendo be reckon, the jubilant sing. One so to fry, my flesh will be thine, pin to be reckon, your burden is mine. Some of these phrases are recognizable somehow. Perhaps they were spoken by the lady in grey during her strange sermon yesterday. I can't be sure, nor can I be sure who's responsible for this sketch and verse. It's quite possible that it was deliberately left here for me to find. Regardless, it has me unsettled. I'm in for a sleepless night, I fear. 10. The Silhouettes. December 30th, 10 a.m. Just as expected, I slept terribly last night. The skin behind my ears is red raw. I tried everything to soothe it: warm water, cold water, moisturizer, the petroleum jelly I found in the bathroom. Nothing helped in the least. Even now I'm forcing myself to resist the temptation to scratch. I'm going to end up drawing blood at this rate. As a result of my poor rest, I found myself mildly irritated when Miss Black delivered breakfast just after 7. I mean, I'm grateful for her generosity, but I just that minute managed to drop off after a night of tossing and turning. I enjoyed the meal, but I couldn't quite finish it. The coffee did nothing to stimulate me either. The critters were at it again, too. I could hear them scuttling, perpetually scuttling. Could hear their weird vocalizations coming and going. Or are those sounds the chewing and chomping noises of 1,000 mouths full of tiny, razor-sharp teeth? They've certainly got a taste for that seaweed, foul stuff that it is. I'm babbling. Got to snap out of it. December 30th, 11:15 a.m. A cold shower has revitalized my senses somewhat. I feel more like myself again. Well, the man I was before my discovery on Silver Street, that is. I spent half the night studying that damned photograph. Right now those four faces are gawping at me, willing me to remember. But aside from the still images drawn from 100 terrible dreams, the dark seafront, the sloping stone, the myriad faces, nothing whatsoever enters my mind when I gaze upon that time-worn picture. There, I've thrown a hand towel over it. I'm sick to death of looking at it. December 30th, 11:25 a.m. Yet again, a crowd has gathered on the square outside. Something up in the hills to the north appears to be attracting attention. Can't make anything out from here. Better head out. Should probably take this journal with me. December 30th, 12:15 p.m. I'm up in West Town, as the locals call it, sitting in an establishment by the name of Shanna's Cafe. It's a small place with room for just 5 tables. From where I'm seated at the bay window, I have a clear view of Watcher's Peak, the summit to which I climbed on my arrival a few days ago. I'm not alone here at Shanna's place. I'm accompanied by a small group of individuals I followed from the square, in order to get a better view of the subjects atop the hill. But I'll get to that in a minute. Shanna, the proprietor of this humble establishment, is quite possibly the warmest member of the community I've encountered thus far. She has a quiet but joyful nature. The act of preparing drinks seems an absolute pleasure for her. The other individuals here at the cafe are Mr. Christensen, a chap of Danish descent who doesn't have a lot to say, Mr. Patterson, a black-haired fellow with a rough complexion, Mrs. Strickland, a widowed senior with a predilection for green tea, and young Dean Charlwood, a lanky teenager with a blonde moustache, a handsome chap altogether. We form an odd group, the five of us, 6 including our host, but our oddness pales compared with the strangeness of what my fellow punters describe as the silhouettes. High above Shanna's cafe, beyond the spires, the terracotta slates, and the terraced cul-de-sacs of the town's northern quarter, the silhouettes are stood atop Watcher's Peak. These ghostly figures, according to Mrs. Strickland, are the Seven Sisters' counterparts, hailing from a hamlet in the northwest by the name of Mountsey. They're a cloistered group, says Mr. Patterson, and are rarely seen outside of their village. Dean Charlwood, the mustachioed teenager, and Mr. Christensen have little to say on the subject. The two of them are simply excited spectators. I'll do my best to describe them from what I can make out down here. Like the Seven Sisters, they number 6 and stand unusually tall and proud. They're wearing long gowns that are billowing quite forcefully in the gale up there. The tallest of their number, a character with long, luminous white hair, is standing at the front of the group. He's bowing now, as are his companions. They're raising their hands in the air, making some sort of sign. According to Mrs. Strickland, the sign, hands clasped together above their heads, suggests that they're about to utter the familiar phrase 211, the 2 words comprising the phrase having been spelled out to me by Mr. Patterson. I've been informed that the phrase is, in fact, a name, the name of the sleeping king. To speak his name is no trivial matter, says Mrs. Strickland. To say it aloud is not only to address the sleeping king, but also to proclaim one's willingness to serve him. The silhouettes are retreating now. My new friends have risen to their feet. They're repeating the sign the leader of the figures made atop Watcher's Peak. They're bowing. Out of respect, I'm putting my pen down for a moment. How surreal, to be gathered in such an ordinary place, a cafe of all places, observing the comings and goings of mysterious disciples as they prepare for the return of an ancient, alien king. I'm almost convinced. Shanna tells me that the silhouettes only ever appear on the eve of 211's arrival. Tomorrow, she says, with the advent of the full moon, 211 will rise from the deeps. I ask, and you really believe that? To which she says, it isn't a question of belief, Mr. Howarth. The return of the sleeping king is as regular as the orbit of the earth around the sun. But you already know that, don't you? And she's right. Somehow I do. Sitting here, staring into space, I cannot help but ponder once again the origin of this strange deity. The notion that life has indeed evolved elsewhere in our very own solar system. Life that formed beneath the icy surface of a distant moon, in waters unfathomably deep and unimaginably alien. What might such a creature look like? Can the crude interpretation seen throughout Redditch truly capture the likeness of such a thing? I suppose the answers to my questions are on the horizon. I think it's time for another drink. Better make it an Irish coffee. 11. The Call. December 30th, 10 p.m. Are these the end times? Or is this something else entirely? Okay, so I'm a little drunk. That Irish coffee at the cafe this afternoon was followed by another Irish coffee. My new friends, Mr. Christensen, Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Strickland, and the young Dean Charlwood all followed suit. Even Shanna couldn't resist. For a good while we made merry. When we'd had enough of the coffee, the brandy came out, a favourite tipple of mine, and, judging by the way in which the young fellow downed the stuff, a favourite of Charlwood's too. Christensen opted for a glass or two of sherry, whereas Patterson and Strickland saw to the emptying of 3 bottles of mulled wine, with a little help from our host. I felt good, optimistic somehow. By the looks on the faces of my new friends, their boozy, grinning mugs, the feeling was mutual. The 5 of us left Shanna's place a little after 6 p.m. and stumbled along the cobbled streets in the direction of the market square. Like an alcohol-fueled snowball, we picked others up as we went, and before long found ourselves propping up the bar here at the Golden Crab. And there we sang and chanted, even embraced one another. There must have been a dozen of us, and by the time the clock struck 7:30, the figure had doubled. With the striking of the town hall clock at 8, out we poured onto the market square, a band of drunken fools, dancing, whistling, howling at the moon, some of our number bellowing 2-on-1 at the top of their voices. And you know what? I felt accustomed to the whole thing. It felt normal. It felt right. Come to think of it, I haven't had so much fun since the winter of '65, shortly before Mary's passing. I do wish she'd been here with me tonight, her little hands in mine. But I digress. As I revelled in the cold with the friendly locals, I thought of my parents, considered their parents. How many generations of the Howarth family might have lived out their days on Seacliffe? How many times might my ancestors have witnessed the return of the sleeping king? These thoughts sobered me somewhat. And then I got to thinking, how is it that on the eve of 2-on-1's return, I still haven't a clue what to expect? Is any of this really happening? Or have my darkest dreams finally consumed me? The full moon was imminent. A glance into the night sky was enough to indicate that. And 2-on-1, the sleeping king of Europa, was right behind it. Sobering thoughts indeed. The merriment on the square calmed somewhat towards 9 o'clock. Members of the community were tiring, myself included, and I think the stark reality of what was about to occur was breathing down the necks of the older generations, those elders who had been there the last time the deity returned, back in 1940. I still had questions for the seniors, questions regarding the suppressed memories forcing their way to the surface. I wanted to know what it was that had resulted in my parents taking the decision to leave the Isle. If that boy in the photograph, that other boy who looked just like me, had in fact been my twin brother, and, if so, what had happened to him. But we were tired, inebriated. Besides, I felt that, somewhere in the back of my mind, the answers to the questions were already there, rising to the surface, just like the sleeping king. I'm by the window now, nursing a headache. I'm drinking water by the gallon. I'm exaggerating, of course, but that burning sensation behind my ears, it's worse than ever. Bring back the booze, I say. Anything to distract me from it. Must rest. Might feel better in the morning. By all accounts, tomorrow's going to be one hell of a day. December 31st, 5 a.m. It's the strangest thing. It's early, terribly early, but I simply had to make a note of the weirdness of the thing. The itching sensation behind my ears has gone, but now, on either side of my head, precisely where the itching was, are tiny apertures, like puncture marks. I should be worried, disturbed even, but I'm not, for somehow my hearing has changed, and I'm aware of distant sounds, low vibrations, and these sounds are emanating from Well, I haven't a clue where they're emanating from. I'm just aware of a faint murmur. I can't ignore it. Can't shut it out by placing my hands over my ears or the apertures. It's just there, humming, pulsating. What has happened to me? December 31st, 5:30 a.m. The critters are at it again. But here's the thing. Not only can I hear them, but also I can see them, too. My vision is extraordinary. My eyes are wholly adapted to the dark now. And those things out there, those small, amorphous, multi-limbed creatures, are everywhere. How do I describe them? They're a deep violet in color, some 10 to 12 inches in height, with short, skinny legs below oval-shaped torsos. In a remote way, they resemble giant beetles covered with fur. Are my eyes deceiving me? Beyond the square, I can see them coming and going, in and out of the surf. The stuff they're feeding on is glowing now. Violet it is, just like them. There are hundreds of them, scurrying crabwise back and forth. This is truly unprecedented. What else can I say? December 31st, 8 a.m. I'm still awake. Haven't felt in the least bit tired since the discovery of my heightened senses earlier this morning. The things I'm hearing now. The things I'm seeing. Miss Black just paid me a visit. No breakfast today, and nor do I need it. She knew about the change in me. She didn't need to say it out loud. I could read it on her face. And then, just like that, she pulled her long dark hair behind her ears, and I saw that the two of us were similarly afflicted. Though she'd skipped breakfast, she had with her a cafetiere. "You should drink the coffee," she said. "The aniseed it contains is useful in counteracting the side effects of the transformation." "Transformation?" I quizzed, my hands absently reaching for my mutations. "Yes," she said. "We all return to form in the days leading up to his homecoming. It's to ensure we hear his call." And she paused, gesturing to the east. "Listen," she added, and I listened. That faint murmur, the call of 211. "What are we?" I asked calmly. "His children," she whispered. December 31st, 11 a.m. The call of the sleeping king is becoming more distinct, louder with every moment that passes. But how to define it? It's a constant buzzing, raucous. It's akin to the sound one might expect a tunnel-boring machine to make, heard from above ground. The sound of something massive, something cutting through the earth, or, in this case, the waters, with intent. It's him, the sleeping king. He's coming home. December 31st, 11:30 a.m. People are making their way to the seafront, where a disturbingly calm ocean awaits them. The drone, louder still, is emanating from those waters. I can feel it in my bones now, that low vibration permeating every cell. Latent memories are surfacing, visions long associated with recurring nightmares, vocalizations belonging to alien threats. There's no denying it. I've heard the call of the sleeping king before. December 31st, 12 p.m. My will to write is ebbing, but I must continue. I came to this place as a writer, and as a writer I intend to leave. But it's hard to concentrate now. It's impossible to shut him out. Miss Black has just left the pub, accompanied by the bartender, Mr. Warad, and the cleaner, Rob Sullivan, amongst others. They're all wrapped up. It's somewhere in the region of 3 below out there. I know I'm going to have to follow them in due course. I can't ignore the call. After all, I'm one of them, one of his. I can't resist it, can't deny my fate. But will I call to him in return? Even now I can hear sporadic cries echoing across the market square. 2 on 1! 2 on 1! What does it mean to serve the sleeping king? What did it mean to my parents? I fear I'm about to find out. 12. The Return of the Sleeping King. December 31st, 3:30 p.m. Am I still Edgar Howarth? I suppose the answer to that question, technically, is yes. But what have I become? We're gathered at the promenade, hundreds of us, by the vast stone platform projecting from the ocean. Is that where he'll position himself? The sun is fading fast. It's cold, devastatingly so. But my gloved hand continues to scribble these words. Must continue. Must document everything. In spite of the overwhelming droning that's slowly filling my head, I'm having to fight to resist it, to stop it from preventing thought altogether. They're all here. Miss Black and her colleagues, young Moffat and his pals, Howie and Hodds, the towering Seven Sisters, the lady in grey with her toes in the water, the miner, James Johnston, his leathery face as white as the surf, the mysterious, soft-spoken Catherine, her delicate hands in the air, the senior with the walking stick, Paul, and his young companion, the cafe owner, Shanna, and my drinking buddies, Christensen, Patterson, Strickland, and Charlwood, all of them waiting for the return of the sleeping king. Relatively few are spouting the name of the sleeping king. Amongst them the town councillors, Mr. Shulpov and Mr. McKeaney, Coretta Scott, the herbalist, Mr. Rhys Davis, the botanist, the proprietor of the little wool shop, Mrs. Hadley, and a staggeringly gaunt individual I've seen a time or two at the Golden Crab, the taciturn giant I've heard referred to as Mr. Skull. But everybody is smiling. All are jovial. There's a keen sense of community here, and a dedication to something that I believe they feel is essential to their continued existence on the Isle of Seacliffe. How much longer will we have to wait, I wonder? December 31st, 4:30 p.m. The moon is upon us, a full moon. It's glowing a bright red now, a fiery red that has once more transformed the ocean below it into a huge pool of blood. The call is ferocious, that endless din emanating from vast, alien vocal cords. The locals are dancing now. Some are singing. Those with small children are pointing and whispering in their ears, resulting in beaming smiles and excitable chuckles. I can't say I feel the same. I'm caught somewhere between the recollection of lifelong dreams and the frigid reality of that which I'm assuredly about to witness in the waking world. But what of Edgar Howarth, the man who penned stories such as The Clipston Conspiracy and The Horror at Stoke Row? He's sure that this is nothing but a dream, that the alien being rising from the deep is just a figment of his imagination. But that relentless din, that call from the sea, this Edgar Howarth, the one who was born on the Isle of Seacliffe, knows that the return of the Ancient One is imminent. Later. The droning has ceased, abruptly so at that. The islanders are restless, anxious. The full blood moon is bathing everything in its crimson light. The waters are churning now. Red waves are lapping at the promenade, gradually increasing in frequency and ferocity. There, on the horizon, a shape beneath the water, a vast, dark shape, rising now, breaking the surface. It's him! I must... December 31st, 11:15 p.m. Horror, madness, how else can I describe it? Mere words are wholly insufficient. I'm here again, by the window in my suite at the Golden Crab, gazing out to sea. A bright white moon illuminates both the dark ocean and the deserted market square. The population of the Isle of Seacliffe diminished early this evening. 35 men and women offered themselves willingly to the thing they call 2-on-1. The rest of us simply stood in silence, watching. I felt a mixture of awe and terror, a puzzling combination. But let me start from the beginning. When that thing emerged from the bloody waters, I all but froze. My limbs ceased to function. My eyes were wide. I was caught somewhere between fear and paralysis. Through eyes that wanted to close, I beheld the sleeping king under the light of the crimson moon. Graciously he approached, his vast bulk sending forth a barrage of waves. The cold waters splashed and splashed, yet motionless I remained. Motionless we all remained. In his presence I ceased to think. I could only watch as the alien form rose higher and higher, larger and larger, closer and closer. His enormous form, the size of a church, slithered into position atop the bare titanic rock, a mass of iridescent tentacle-like limbs attaching themselves to the stone. A fleshy trunk, the width of a house, rose from the appendages, towering tree-like above the platform. Atop this strange torso sat an appalling head. My eyes watered as I gazed upon it. As depicted throughout Redditch, the head, like that of the humble coalfish, consisted of a terrible, leering snout, 2 glistening eyes as black as a shark's, and atop the crown at least a dozen twitching, translucent feelers. The whole visage was made all the more terrible by the mud, the chunky, deep-sea sludge that dripped from every limb and every protuberance. As the thing shambled and gyrated, its dead eye seeking its prey, I sought the protection of my shaking, gloved hands. Up they came, covering eyes that wouldn't close. To have gazed a moment longer at the thing would have been to call its name, to give myself willingly, as some of the others were about to do. Having averted my gaze from the thing, and continuing to shield myself from it with cupped hands, I watched in horror as certain islanders, one by one, began to wade into the sea in the direction of their deity. I saw 4 of the 7 sisters, the lady in grey leading the way, followed by 3 members of the Silhouettes. Old Man Johnston, held above the waters by my drinking pal, Mr. Patterson, the bartender, Mr. Warad, the widow, Mrs. Strickland, the councillors, Shulpov and McKeaney, these, and many more, all of them murmuring the name of the sleeping king. 2-on-1, 2-on-1. As I stood there, a memory that before had been nothing more than images glimpsed in a dream came back to me with crystal clarity. I realized that I'd stood in the presence of the sleeping king before. I've spoken of my dreams, visions of the seafront, a huge rocky platform, faces surrounding me, but I know now that those dreams were recollections. In the winter of 1940, in the company of 100 or so islanders and my parents, I stood on the promenade at Redditch and watched as several children, including a boy who looked just like me, boarded a dory and were cast off into the night. Due to the inactivity of the critters that year, the sleeping king had failed to surface, and so, fearing retribution, the people of Seacliffe had offered up 7 children in order to placate him. According to the Silhouettes, who watched from Watcher's Peak, a large, dark shape pulled the dory under, confirming 2-on-1's acceptance of the proffered gift. and so it was assumed that the god was appeased. There was dancing and merriment, just as there was this very evening. But my parents, as evidenced by their decision to leave the isle shortly afterwards, must have felt that it wasn't enough, that the sleeping king might return in quick succession to feed upon their remaining son. Abruptly, I was drawn out of my reverie by a sound, a disgusting, slopping sound. The sleeping king was feeding. He slobbered and chomped, crunched and swallowed, over and over again. But there were no cries of anguish, no screams of pain. The willing victims of 2-on-1 slipped down his alien gullet without so much as a whimper. Was my brother so easily consumed 50 years ago? This time around, the sleeping king was feeding well. With every morsel, every chunk of human anatomy that he devoured, strange, low vocalizations were produced, utterances audible only to the people of Seacliffe, those of us with the strange apertures behind our ears. And then it was over. I heard a thunderous splash as the sleeping king returned to the ocean. I ventured a glance in his direction and saw the last of his tentacles disappear beneath the surface. A sizable wave drenched the promenade, and then, as the dark shape that was 2-on-1 faded into the depths of the North Sea, the cheering began. The islanders jumped up and down, embraced one another, shed tears. For it wasn't a horror show they'd just witnessed. It was the fulfillment of an age-old tradition. The sleeping king had fled his home world eons ago, sought refuge on this pale blue dot. The pact between him and the people of Seacliffe had been established long before rational thought entered the minds of men. To sacrifice themselves to their god was as natural as the changing of the seasons. Tonight, those who surrendered themselves to 2-on-1 did so willingly. But I'm not sure the same can be said for my brother and the other children sacrificed 50 years ago. January 1st, 1991, 6:30 a.m. I met with the sleeping king in my dreams last night. Met with him in a dark, sunken world, just as I have done for years, it would seem. He was kind, sympathetic. In the context of that aquatic realm, his appearance no longer troubled me. I suspect that, like the humble blobfish, 2-on-1 was never meant to surface. He's a dweller of the deep, an alien deep, a world that only our wildest fantasies can offer even the remotest glimpse. He tells me that my recollections are flawed. The 7 children he fed upon in the winter of 1940 offered themselves willingly. Never has he fed upon a reluctant subject. I know now why they call him the Sleeping King. He's hiding in his subaquatic lair, waiting. He wants to go home, to return to where he came from, the smooth-surfaced moon we call Europa. But the unspeakable beings that drove him and his kind out will never allow it. What strange dreams they were. What strange dreams they've always been. The apertures behind my ears are gone. It's like they were never there. Rather like 2-on-1 himself. If I've learned anything, it's this. I belong here on Seacliffe. I've always belonged here. This journal will serve as a chronicle of a private journey. I've come full circle now. The question is, where do I go from here? And so ends the account of Edgar J. Howarth. As of yet, nobody has been able to vouch for the authenticity of the events as described in the account, and the man himself is unable to comment due to the fact that he hasn't been seen nor heard from since departing Fisherman's Cottage in Staithes on the morning of December 26th, 1990. Questioned in the years since Howarth's alleged visit, inhabitants of the Isle of Seacliffe's capital, Redditch, deny ever meeting him, despite the intimate descriptions of numerous residents and locations included in the account. The same can be said for Gordon Cooper, the fisherman who ostensibly agreed to transport Howth to and from the island. The handwritten journal, upon the pages of which the account was scribbled, was found in a leather hold-all washed ashore at Runswick Bay on January 4th, 1991. Some have suggested that perhaps the imaginative author got himself into a spot of bother during his purported visit to the isle, due to an unusual item found in the vicinity of the hold-all, a blood-stained plastic arm belonging to a statue or stage prop. His whereabouts remain unknown to this day. If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,